Today I'd like to show you several trees and shrubs that have a special place in the winter landscape because of some unique and very attractive bark features. Now, when Sue and I were making the list of plants to go show you, our problem wasn't in finding plants to show you, it was deciding which ones not to show you. The more we thought about it, even the plants with plain gray-brown bark, even those have a special interest if you look at them closely. Take this hackberry, for instance. The young bark is a nice smooth gray color. As it gets older, you start getting corky protuberances coming out. And as the bark gets quite older, that develops into some very nice, finely laced, corky ridges. Now, your oaks have very coarse, very broad, fissured bark, which again are just kind of plain grayish brown, but have a very bold effect in the landscape. The maples, like the silver maple, have a very nice light gray smooth bark which roughens with age but still has a very nice smooth appearance. Our mimosa, even when the bark gets quite old, it still has a very smooth texture, very different even though it is very plain. Now, Chinese pistache we've talked about several times. It has rough bark also, but it has much more angular, much more rough, fissured bark than many of the others. And the lichens, when they start growing on the older trunks, adds another point of interest. Now, your conifers, such as the cedars, like this eastern red cedar, also have very attractive bark. The eastern red cedar has a very fibrous, peeling bark, reddish brown, very attractive. Bald cypress, it's a deciduous conifer, but it is a conifer. It also has very nice, attractive, peeling, fibrous bark. Now you get into your pines, and again you might think of them as just kind of plain old bark. They are mostly just generally grayish brown and rough, but if you look at them, they have very attractive patterns, make a very nice bold statement in your landscape. But even with a horticulturist's delight in all the different forms of bark, there are several that really do stand out because of their color. Let's go look at those. The Scots pine, like most of the other pines, has very relatively plain and coarse older bark, not unattractive, but its real claim to fame for color comes on the much younger bark, which is a scaly, flaky, cinnamon orange color, very attractive. In addition, the Scots pine has very nice short bluish-green needles. Now, the Scots pine is not adapted to all of Oklahoma. It does best in the eastern and central portions of the state. It does like and really require some supplemental irrigation, especially when the trees are small. After they're older, they can tolerate a little bit of drought, but they're not really adapted to panhandle or western Oklahoma conditions. It is also susceptible to pine tip borer when they're young. The trees grow generally with a very irregular branching pattern. They almost, on the mature specimens, they almost look like large overgrown bonsai specimens. So you get trunk, branch, and bark interest from the Scots pine. Among the deciduous trees, the first that I'd like to show you is the Lacebark Elm. Now, on a young tree, the bark really is nothing spectacular. It's a nice, smooth, gray color, but it's only when you get down to the older bark after several years that it starts to peel away in flakes and leave patches of the brown underbark. Now, on mature trees, this turns into a very spectacular pattern. It is one of the nicest bark trees, shade trees that you can get. It also has the advantage of being very rugged. It's probably one of the best trees for throughout Oklahoma. It can withstand drought, dry conditions. It responds very well to good conditions, but it's almost impossible to kill. It will thrive in very tough conditions. It also has the advantage over the American and Siberian elm of being resistant to Dutch elm disease, and it's not bothered by elm leaf beetle very much at all. So in addition to being a very rugged, durable, and adaptable tree, you get the added bonus of very beautiful bark patterns. The cottonwood is a very popular and well-adapted tree throughout Oklahoma, and the young bark is very attractive. But for really spectacular bark, you need to go to a close relative of the cottonwood, and that's the white poplar. Now the white poplar, as I said, is a very close relative. It grows throughout Oklahoma. It's very cold tolerant, very well adapted to a wide variety of soils. It's very fast growing, not the strongest of wood, but then again, it's not the weakest wood either. One problem it does have is that it will tend to sucker from the roots, especially if the tree has been damaged or is under stress. But as long as the tree has good growing conditions, good water, then generally the suckering tendency is relatively limited. There is a cultivar of white poplar, the Boliana poplar, which has the same coloration, but is a very narrow, upright form, very much like the Lombardy poplar, but much better adapted. And a further advantage of the Boliana poplar is that it doesn't sucker like the main type of white poplar. In addition to the white bark, it also has a very nice silvery green foliage during the summer. The sycamore is a tree that's native to Oklahoma river bottoms, and as you can see, it has very, very nice, very attractive bark. Now, the London plane tree has very similar bark and tree characteristics. As a matter of fact, it's a hybrid between the native sycamore and the European sycamore. Now, one big difference is that the native sycamore is very susceptible to anthracnose. That's a fungus disease of the leaves. London plane tree is quite resistant to it. Now, one problem with both sycamore and London plane trees is that they produce many seed balls, and they can be very messy. Now, this is one way to tell the difference between the two trees. A sycamore, these seed balls will come singly. On a London plane tree, they will come either in pairs or in groups of 3. Even though they can be very messy, as you can see, the bark is very spectacular. The river birch is native to eastern Oklahoma in river bottoms, and in the wild, generally the peeling bark is a brownish color. There are newer selections, such as Heritage, which have a white peeling bark, which is very, very attractive, either planted singly or planted as clumps. Now, being a river bottom tree makes certain that the river birch has plenty of water. This means it's probably best adapted to eastern and central Oklahoma. Also, don't confuse it with the paper birch and the European white birch. These are northern trees that simply cannot stand our hot summer weather and are very susceptible to birch borers. But the river birch has excellent tolerance to the summer heat, and with the newer varieties such as Heritage, has equal superior bark interest. The winged Euonymus is a deciduous shrub that has spectacular red fall color. It also has bark interest. It has corky wings on the bark. As we look very closely, there are also 2 forms of winged Euonymus. The large form, which grows 8 to 10 feet, and a compact form such as this, which will only grow 4 feet tall. Another deciduous shrub that has some bark interest is the crepe myrtle. Now, you may be mostly familiar with the crepe myrtle as a shrubby, flowering shrub. However, if you take and prune out your shrub so that you only leave 3 or 4 main stems, the older bark on crepe myrtle is very attractive. It resembles the sycamore very closely. As you can see on this older specimen that we were looking at on campus, very nice flaking bark. Once you have your bush trained to just 3 or 4 single stems, you'll need to keep after the base because it'll send up a lot of suckers. You'll need to keep them down. That'll be probably a constant maintenance chore, is keeping those suckers off. And after a few years, the diameter of these stems will get large enough so that you can start seeing good bark texture on them. Now, one problem with training your crepe myrtle like this, especially in northern Oklahoma, is that we can get winters where crepe myrtle will kill back all the way to the ground. Now, this would happen whether you were training it this way or as a multi-stem shrub, but it just means that you'll have to start training your trunks all over again from some new sprouts that came up. But if you do want to try and get your bark texture out of it. In southern Oklahoma, it's no problem. In northern Oklahoma, even though it freezes back, it is worth the risk to get that very nice bark texture and color in your landscape.